Buddha's final teaching, repeated, 99% get the raft metaphor wrong. There's a teaching that the Buddha repeated several times toward the end of his life, telling his students that they had to make themselves a refuge. He wasn't going to be around much longer, so it was up to them to provide themselves with protection. He said that you make yourself your refuge by making the Dhamma your refuge, and you make the Dhamma your refuge by practicing the establishings of mindfulness, starting out, say, with the breath. You focus on the breath, and you do what you can to remember to stay with the breath. Then you watch yourself. Watch the breath to see how the breath is going. Watch the mind to see how the mind is going. And then you're ardent, trying to get rid of unskillful qualities and develop skillful ones. That ardency is based on a quality called appropriate attention. That too is one of your inner refuges. It's what lies at the beginning of right view. That's something you have to remember as well. Appropriate attention focuses attention on questions of what is skillful, what is not skillful. If something unskillful comes up, how do you get rid of it in an effective way? This you learn from listening to others and also from observing yourself. In fact, as the Buddha said, right view, appropriate attention, can come from two things. One is from outside influences. Someone else points you in the right direction. And the other is from your own contemplation. You begin to see, yes, it is true that these qualities are skillful and unskillful. But in the same way, there are dangers that come both from outside and from within. There are people outside who would be all too happy to teach you wrong view. In some cases, they're pretty insistent that their views are right, but they're really, really wrong. Then there are cases where you, of your own accord, can begin to engage in what the Buddha calls inappropriate attention, which is a matter of forgetting about the questions of what you're doing and whether it's skillful or not, and getting tied up in other issues. So you need protection on both sides, both from outside and from inside dangers, because if people get you to adopt wrong view, they can also convince you that, say, the precepts aren't important, that it's perfectly okay, and maybe even praiseworthy to break precepts now and then. That's going to be for your long-term harm. Protection, inside and out. This is something special about the Buddha's understanding of dangers. They're both outside and inside. Nowadays, we have politicians who tell us that all the dangers are out there and they're going to protect us from the dangers out there. Then we've got the New Age people. They say that all the dangers are inside. When you don't realize that you're one with all beings or interconnected with all beings, you're going to do unskillful things. But if you realize oneness, you'll automatically be okay. The oneness is something you can trust. That's what they say. Both of those teachings are teaching you to be heedless. In other words, you look at the dangers in the wrong places, or have a one-sided view of where the dangers are. So as we live in this land of wrong view, it's important to keep in mind that, yes, there are dangers outside. There are people who could be teaching us things, or simply taking for granted certain views, and hoping that we'll be taking those views for granted as well. Views that ultimately are for our long-term harm. So as you go out into the world, remind yourself that right view is something you've really got to hold on to. Your precepts are something you've really got to hold on to. There are politicians who say, watch out. Someone's going to come and take your wealth. They're going to take this, take that. They're going to harm your relatives. The Buddha said loss in those cases is very minor. You don't go to hell for losing those things. But you can go to hell for losing your virtue and losing your right view, so those are the things you've got to protect. Then, of course, there are voices inside the mind that are all too happy to tell you to develop wrong view too. So it's important to realize which things are the things you have to hold on to, which things you may have to let go. The Buddha doesn't tell you just to let go of everything all at once. This is a constantly repeated image among the forest ajahns. There are stages in the path where you really have to hold on. Ajahn Mahabhuva's is the image of a ladder up to the roof of your house. You hold on to one rung and then you hold on to the next rung higher than that, and only when you've gotten a firm grip on the next rung do you let go of the lower rung and then reach out for the next one still higher and hold on to that. When you keep this up, you ultimately get up to the roof. It's when you're on the roof that you can let go of the ladder entirely. Then, Ananda's image was of crossing over a river, going from basically one stepping stone to the next stepping stone. You go from one thing that you hold on to another thing you hold on to. Or, as he said, one clinging to the next clinging. So don't believe the voices inside or out that say you have to let go of everything, or that if you're holding on to some aspect of the practice, you're on a lowly level of practice, and if you want to get to a higher level, you have to let go. There's that famous image of the raft. Everyone focuses on the end of the story when you get to the other side of the river. That's when you let go of the raft. You don't carry it around. But they forget to focus first on the fact that while you're crossing the river, you have to hold on tight to the raft and you have to make an effort. There's actually a Mahayana version of that image that says to get across the river, you have to let go of the raft, but I've never seen that work in any way at all. So, hold on to your right view. Hold on to your virtue. Hold on to your appropriate attention. Hold on to your good friends, whether good friends outside or good friends inside, admirable friends, the ones who keep reminding you of what is for your own true well-being. Now, this doesn't mean that you abandon all your other friends. The Buddha does recognize that there are what might be called loyal friends, the ones who would be willing to sacrifice for you, who help you, who stick with you in hard times. But they too, he said, should be the kind of people who, when they notice that you're doing something unskillful, try to steer you away from that. So recognize that your good friends come in two kinds, the loyal ones and the admirable ones. You should be loyal to your loyal friends, but the ones you really listen to, the ones whose advice you really take to heart, should be the admirable ones. But of course, knowing who's admirable and who's not depends on your own powers of judgment. Everything keeps coming back to you. You've got to be your own refuge, but to protect you from outside dangers, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are offered as good examples. When you think about what the world has to offer and the prices you have to pay in order to get what the world has to offer, think about the Buddha's values. Would he make that deal? Sometimes some of the offers are perfectly fine as far as virtue is concerned. There'd be no problem. It's when there's some difficulty in terms of the virtue, difficulty in terms of the precepts, that's when you have to be willing to make sacrifices for the sake of holding to your precepts, but it's a sacrifice of a short-term good for a long-term good. So these are some of the ways in which you develop mindfulness. The mindfulness to be skillful, rooted in the breath, so that you're rooted in the present moment with a sense of well-being that makes it a lot easier to make the skillful decision. That's how you find true protection and true refuge from dangers both inside and out. Protection through mindfulness practice. The Buddha often talks about the practice of satipatthana, or the establishing of mindfulness, as a kind of protection. He says that you make yourself a refuge when you practice the establishing of mindfulness. You make yourself an island, a safe place in the middle of the flood. There's also the passage where he tells the story of two acrobats. As each acrobat maintains his or her own sense of balance, each is protecting him or herself and also provides a protection for the other. This too, the Buddha then says, is an analogy for the establishing of mindfulness. So, what kind of protection does mindfulness provide? Here it's useful to note that when the Buddha talked about the duties of a teacher, one of them is to provide protection for the student in all directions. In his own case, this meant that he gave the student clear reasons for what should and shouldn't be done, lessons that the student could take along wherever he'd go, and that would be valid in whatever direction he went. After all, we go through life active, not passive. We're shaping our experience, so we need guidance as to what ways will provide us with happiness in the long term and help us avoid suffering in the long term. The main danger in life is our own lack of knowledge in this area, or even worse, believing that our actions don't matter or have no results. That's really dangerous. A lot more dangerous than the dangers other people can pose to us. So this question of protection has to apply to what you're doing with your mind right now. This is where the establishing of mindfulness provides a really good protection, because when we look at the three qualities that go into establishing mindfulness, ardency, alertness, and mindfulness, we can see that they're not just matters of accepting or resigning ourselves to whatever comes up. They give guidance as to what to do, right here, right now. Mindfulness is what keeps in mind the ability to recognize things, the labels we have for naming things as they come up in the present moment. That's the first step. The second step is that once you've recognized what something is, mindfulness reminds you of what should or shouldn't be done with it. It reminds you not only what you've read in the text or heard from teachers, but also what you've learned on your own in your practice, as to what works and what doesn't work in giving rise to skillful qualities. That's how your power of memory is a protector. Then there's alertness. Alertness watches what's actually happening, and in particular, what you're doing and the results you're getting from what you're doing. You might say that it takes note of what's happening and then sends the information over to mindfulness. Mindfulness then recognizes what's going on and gives instruction as for what should be done. If something is unskillful and you recognize it as something unskillful, then you remember that it's something you've got to get rid of, and you try to remember how. And finally, ardency is what does what should be done. So these three qualities working together all provide you with your own protection, and their interaction goes further. Once ardency has done something well, alertness notes that. When it's done something not so well, alertness will note that too. Then you send that information off to mindfulness to remember. So you want to strengthen these qualities as much as you can, because if you're missing any of them, you're left without protection. Each of them provides protection in its own particular way. For example, in some cases you may not be able to recognize if something is skillful or not. You can't recognize what's happening, and in this case, your protection is to be really, really alert. That means that you have to watch it for a while, as in Ajahn Mun's advice to Ajahn Mahabhuwa. If something comes up in your meditation and you're not sure about it, watch it. Stay with that sense of awareness, the observer, the knower, and don't be too quick to come to any conclusions until you can see what's actually happening. Ultimately, you'll recognize it as something skillful or unskillful, something to be developed or something to be abandoned, but be careful not to jump too quickly to conclusions. That's alertness over the long term. There are also the times when alertness has to be very quick, as in Upasika Key's advice. When something comes up in the meditation that seems really good, or an insight comes up that's really compelling, note what happens immediately after that. In other words, you've got to be alert continuously. You can't go riding with a sense of, say, pride or a sense of total conviction in the insight. Look for cause and effect in the very act of having an insight. Try to see what happens as a result of believing that insight. So, there are times when alertness provides protection by being long-term, and other times when it provides protection by being very quick. You really can't lack any of these three qualities. If you forget what you've learned from the past, you're totally defenseless. At the same time, if you know what should be done but you don't carry it through, then you're not really protecting yourself either. So you have to work on all these three qualities together. One main problem is that when something comes up in the mind, we tend to think of it in terms of our own vocabulary. Lust comes up, and our vocabulary says that it's something good. Anger comes up, and even though part of us may think that it's not all that good, another part of us really likes it. This is why mindfulness, remembering the Buddha's vocabulary for these things, has to be strong. It enables you to recognize when there's something that, for the sake of the practice, you don't want to follow, and it reminds you of the tools you have to deal with it. When lust comes up, for instance, the mind can create all kinds of reasons for why the object of lust is really attractive. You've got to remember to recognize it as a hindrance, and to recall that if you follow through with it, it's going to create a lot of trouble. Among the tools that mindfulness can use to help you here is the ability to remember that lust has its dangers. Here, it's good to think of all the stupid things people do under the power of lust, and the awful situations they get themselves into, getting tied down to a person they thought was attractive, and then discovering what else there is in that person, the person's background, personality, family, all the connections that come bundled with that person. That helps you realize how risky it is. When this really hits home, you'll be a little more likely to want to actually apply that meditation in the chant right now on the different parts of the body. First, think about your own body. What's in there that's really worthy of lust? Take out all the parts and examine them to see which of them could be really attractive. Only then do you apply the same contemplation to the other person, which is what makes it fair. In other words, you're not saying that the other gender or the other person is the bad one. Your body too has the same sort of stuff. But as the Buddha says, this analysis is going to work only if you have an alternative source of pleasure. This is why we work with the breath. The two contemplations have to go together. All too often, when you're really tired or stressed out, you say to yourself that the pleasure that comes from the lust is really worth it. It's something you really need. You want your quick fix. But if you can take a few minutes to stop and just breathe in a way that's really refreshing, really nourishing, you give yourself some relief, you give yourself some strength, you give yourself some food, and then that enables you to say to yourself, actually, I don't really need that other kind of pleasure after all. This is why ardency in developing concentration can be your first-line protection against lust. As the Buddha said, you can know all the drawbacks of sensuality, but if you don't have an alternative form of pleasure, all that knowledge is worthless. So ardency here also has to develop concentration, a sense of non-sensual well-being, working with the breath. We've talked for the last couple of days in the Q&A about different ways of working with the breath energy, and it's important to take some time to explore this aspect of your relationship to your body. What kind of movement of the breath is actually helpful? What kind of movement of the breath makes it more difficult to stay with the body? And learn to play. Take the breath energy in the body as your playground here, and be open to new ideas about how the breath energy can move. You'll notice in Ajahn Lee's basic instructions that he talks about the breath energy going down the spine and down the legs as you breathe in. But it can also do that as you breathe out. There are other times when he talks about the breath energy starting in the soles of the feet, coming up the legs and up the spine in the other direction. You may read in manuals on Tai Chi that there's an energy circle running from the navel down to the spot between the legs, and then back up the spine and down the front of the torso to the navel. But in your own case, you may find that as you breathe in, a certain part of the energy can run a circle that goes up the front and down the back, or up the back and down the front, whichever way you want the energy to go. There are lots of different ways you can work with the energy. Don't limit yourself. The more variety you can find in dealing with the breath, the more intriguing it will be to stay with the body, and the more you'll be able to find a sense of well-being for the body, giving it just what it needs at any particular time. This allows you to step back, say, from your anger or lust, and look at the other physical and mental symptoms that you've put together to create that lustful or angry state to begin with. After all, these are things that we fabricate. We're really good at putting them together. A little sensation here, a little sensation there, you tie them together, and there you are. Lust is overcoming you. It's laid claim to your body and to your mind. You've suddenly got all that pressure inside that you've got to do something about. The same with anger. This person did that and that and that, and then you can stitch all the that's together into a big story, and it gets your blood boiling. There was a report recently about how people with strong bouts of anger are more likely to have a heart attack a couple of hours later. The researchers said they didn't know what the connection was, although it's pretty obvious. We stitch all these things together, and then all the stitched together parts block the energy flow, pressure builds up, and something explodes. All it takes is a little random sensation here and there, and the mind has learned how to be really good at stitching them into a web to catch itself. We've been doing this for who knows how many lifetimes. But if you have a sense of well-being with the breath, then you can step back from these fabrications. You begin to take them apart, to cut through all the connections you've created. Ask yourself, what was the first sensation in the body? What was the first little thought in the mind? The little whisper of thought that suggested that lust might be a good antidote for whatever sense of irritation you're feeling, or that anger would be an appropriate response for what someone's done. And how does that work its way through your inner bureaucracy, influencing this person, that person inside, all those committee members working together, creating little sensations here and there, and all of a sudden, you've got a full-blown case. If you want to believe their propaganda, when that happens, you're throwing away your protection. Your protection is to remind yourself this is an unskillful state, and you have to be alert. One of the things you remember with mindfulness is that if you stay with the body, or in particular, stay with the breath, you're going to be here in the present moment. That way, when these things happen, you'll see them in time, and you'll be alert to upcoming trends. If you see that things are going in a bad direction, you can turn them around. This is how these three qualities keep spinning around the mind and the body, working to give you the protection you need from things like lust, aversion, delusion, greed, all the unskillful things that come welling up inside that you've been so good at creating and that create so many dangers for yourself. This is why, when Ajahn Lee was writing about the establishing of mindfulness, he kept hammering away at these three qualities: mindfulness, alertness, ardency, mindfulness, alertness, ardency. They lie at the essence of how the establishing of mindfulness can provide you with a protection and be your refuge, your island in the middle of the river, or, as they say in another passage in the canon, your island in the middle of a lake. The lake is rising, but you've got this island that provides you with a refuge so that you don't have to drown in the lake. So don't abandon it. Think of that image of the quail being hunted by a hawk. As long as the quail stays in its safe territory, the hawk can't get it. But as soon as it wanders out, there's no guarantee. And what does it mean to wander out of your safe territory? To get fascinated with sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, all the raw materials for things like passion and aversion. If you do that, the hawk can get you. But if you stay in your proper territory, the establishing of mindfulness, you're safe. Of course, it's not just a place, it's also a combination of activities here in the mind. They're your protectors, so nourish them well. Safety in a duality. When the Buddha listed the duties of teachers to their students, DN 31, the final and most prominent item on the list was this: that the teacher provide the student with protection in all directions. Of course, this didn't mean that teachers were duty-bound to follow their students around with shields to ward off potential dangers. Instead, it meant that they should provide their students with knowledge that the students could use to protect themselves in every situation. And in a dialogue where the Buddha criticized some teachers of other sects for leaving their students unprotected, AN 362, he made clear that protective knowledge was expressed in terms of a duality, clearly seeing the difference between what should and shouldn't be done. That's right, a duality. For all the dualities the Buddha avoided, this was one he adhered to consistently in his role as a responsible teacher. The need for this kind of protective knowledge is based on the Buddha's analysis of how we shape our experience. Instead of being passive recipients of the results of past karma, we're proactive. Through our desires, expressed in acts of attention, perception, and intention, we shape the input of the senses coming from past karma into a present moment experience. The problem is that we're often ignorant of what we're doing, so we shape things unskillfully and suffer as a result. When we suffer, we react in two ways. The first reaction is bewilderment. Where does this suffering come from? The second is a search. Is there anyone who knows a way out of this suffering? In 663, the search explains why people go looking for teachers in the first place. The bewilderment explains why we can easily look to the wrong people for help. So, we need two sorts of protection. Protection against ourselves to overcome our ignorance of what we're doing, and protection against teachers. And this can include anyone who offers advice, even well-meaning friends and acquaintances, who might take advantage of our ignorance to knowingly or unknowingly do us harm. The knowledge that the Buddha offered as protection attacked these problems on many levels, and the word attack is appropriate here. In AN 362, he did something that he rarely ever did, which was to seek out other teachers and attack them for their teachings. The harm they were causing was, in his eyes, that serious. He criticized in particular three doctrines: that whatever pleasure or pain you experience is 1. Determined by past actions, 2. Determined by a creator God, or 3. Occurs randomly, without cause or condition. In each case, his criticism was the same. If you adopted any of these teachings, you'd believe yourself powerless in the present moment to change things here and now. You'd have no motivation to think in terms of what should and shouldn't be done, because the choice would be meaningless. All your actions in the present moment, in your eyes, would either be predetermined or ineffectual. The duality between good and evil, an empty convention. The Buddha's argument was identical in each of the three cases, so here are his words on just the first. In that case, a person is a killer of living beings because of what was done in the past. A person is a thief, uncelibate, a liar, a divisive speaker, a harsh speaker, an idle chatterer, greedy, malicious, a holder of wrong views because of what was done in the past. When one falls back on what was done in the past as being essential, there is no desire, no effort at the thought, this should be done, this shouldn't be done. When one can't pin down as a truth or reality what should and shouldn't be done, one dwells bewildered and unprotected. The implication here is that if a teaching is going to protect you, the first level of protection has to be on the theoretical level. You have to understand that your present actions are free, to at least some extent, to shape the present moment, for good or bad, and to have an impact on the future. This understanding of karma would then provide you with motivation for looking carefully at what should and shouldn't be done right now to avoid causing suffering. And this is precisely the understanding of karma that the Buddha taught. As he pointed out in AN 3101, past actions do have their impact on the present moment, but your experience of that impact is filtered through your present moment state mind. This is one of the reasons why Buddhist meditation focuses on being alert to what the mind is doing right now. If you're sensitive to your present actions, you can shape them well enough to mitigate the influences from any past bad karma and, through your present skillful karma, to provide conditions for pleasure and happiness now and into the future. So the first level of protection lies in the realm of general theory. However, the dualistic knowledge offered by the Buddha doesn't stop there. It also goes into specific examples of what should and shouldn't be done, and from there into general principles to be used in judging for yourself what should and shouldn't be done in instances not covered by the examples. The examples are offered as rules and precepts, such as the precepts against killing, stealing, illicit sex, lying, and taking intoxicants. Many people don't like rules, seeing them as small-minded and confining, but it's hard to argue with some of the rules the Buddha offers for your protection. They give you clear warning signs for when your ignorance is blinding you to behavior that will, in the long term, cause harm. The rules give you objective standards for judging not only your own behavior, but also the behavior of people who offer themselves as teachers. The monks, for example, have a rule that if a monk even suggests to a student, or anyone at all for that matter, that she would benefit from having sex with him, he has to undergo a penance for 6 days. During the penance, he is stripped of his seniority and has to confess his offense to all his fellow monks daily. If he hides the offense, then when he's found out, he has to undergo an added probation for as many days as he hid the offense. If he actually goes ahead and has sex with anyone, he's out. Period. Automatically stripped of his status as a monk, he cannot reordain for the rest of this lifetime. The existence of these rules doesn't guarantee that people won't break them, but they do serve as red flags to indicate that the Buddha had no tolerance for this sort of behavior. Students aware of these rules would then know for sure when a monk, or any teacher, had stepped out of bounds. If knowledge of these rules were available in all Buddhist communities, it would prevent a lot of confusion and grief. You sometimes hear the argument that awakened people are beyond observing the precepts because they have abandoned the fetter of grasping at precepts and practices, Silabbata Paramasa. But this argument is based on a misunderstanding of what grasping means here. Actually, as AN 1092 shows, people who have abandoned this fetter never intentionally break the precepts. Their precepts are untorn, unbroken, unspotted, unsplattered, liberating, praised by the observant, ungrasped at, leading to concentration. The fact that they're untorn, etc., means that they're observed consistently. Ungrasped at means that even though such people are virtuous, they don't fashion themselves around their virtues, MN 78. In other words, they don't build an identity around being virtuous. This means that awakened people are consistently virtuous, but unlike ordinary people still grappling with the precepts, they've freed themselves from the need to construct an identity around virtue in order to maintain it. So although they don't have to keep reminding themselves of the precepts, their behavior still falls perfectly in line with what the precepts teach. As for the general principles the Buddha taught for deciding what should and shouldn't be done, they start on a very basic level with the instructions he gave to his son, Rahula, on how to purify his actions, MN 61. These boil down to the principle that you judge your actions both by the intentions motivating them and by the results they yield. If you can foresee that an action you want to do will cause harm, either to yourself or to others, you shouldn't do it. If you don't foresee harm, you can go ahead and do it, but in line with the power of actions to shape both the present and the future, you have to check for the results of the action both while you're doing it and after it's done. If, in the course of doing the action, you find that you're causing unexpected harm, you stop. If you find out only after the fact that it caused harm, you talk it over with someone more advanced on the path and resolve not to repeat the mistake. This way, you gain practical experience based on your own powers of observation in mastering the dualistic principle of what should and shouldn't be done. The duality of this principle extends to more advanced teachings as well. The Four Noble Truths, for example, are basically dualistic, and not just because four is a dual duality. Suffering, the first noble truth, and the end of suffering, the third, are two very different things. You may have heard the Buddha quoted as saying, "I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering," which sounds like he's offering a non-dualistic perspective on suffering and its end. But that wasn't what he actually said. His actual words were much more straightforward and dualistic. "Both formerly and now, it's only suffering that I describe and the cessation of suffering." SN 2286. The duties appropriate to the Four Noble Truths show that this is a genuine duality. The origination of suffering, the second noble truth, should be abandoned. The path to the cessation of suffering, the fourth truth, should be developed. Abandoning and developing are two opposite things, and the path is composed of 8 right factors, clearly differentiated from 8 corresponding wrong factors. All of this continues the dualistic pattern of the Buddha's protective teaching, having a solid grounding for deciding what should and shouldn't be done. This pattern extends even to the Buddha's subtlest teaching, dependent co-arising, his detailed explanation of all the many factors that go into causing suffering. This teaching is sometimes hailed as non-dualistic, and it is true that the Buddha's explanation of these factors avoids the duality of saying that everything is either a oneness or a plurality, SN 1248. So to that extent, they are non-dual. But when the Buddha explained dependent co-arising in detail, he repeatedly presented it in terms of a different duality, how it should and shouldn't be approached. See, for starters, the many discourses in SN 12. If, when dealing with the factors as they actually present themselves, you approach them in ignorance, you cause suffering. If you approach them in terms of knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and their duties, you bring suffering to an end. So, here again, even on the most refined levels of the Dhamma, there's a clear distinction between what should and shouldn't be done. Which means that even though the Buddha taught metaphysical non-duality with regard to some issues, he didn't take a blanket non-dual approach to all issues, and especially not to moral ones. The distinction between actions that should and shouldn't be done is a duality that offers protection, inside and out, on every level of the practice, from the most basic to the most advanced. If we look at the Buddha's teachings on this duality in terms of Western psychoanalysis, we can see that what he's teaching is a healthy superego, the functions of the mind that provide you with a strong sense of what should and shouldn't be done. However, unlike the Western superego that Freud studied, the Buddhist superego is not heedless of your happiness, and it's not forced on you against your will. Instead, its primary concern is focused directly on your true happiness, and the Buddha offers his shoulds as conditional. He's not demanding that you follow his advice, but from his vast experience, he's advising you that if you want true happiness, if you want to protect yourself, and if you want to end your bewilderment, this is how it has to be done. The choice to take on these shoulds, or not, is yours. The sad irony is that the basic duality of the Buddha's protective teachings has become so deeply obscured over the centuries. A teaching that the Buddha denounced, that the present moment is determined by your past karma, has become widely accepted as the standard Buddhist explanation of karma. Non-duality has been proclaimed as superior and more advanced than duality in all areas, including the distinction between right and wrong, what should and shouldn't be done. The ego has been so demonized that many students are led to believe that all ego and superego functions have to be obliterated if they want to gain awakening. The result is that many people who encounter these unsafe teachings when coming to Buddhism actually find themselves stripped of whatever protective sense of should and shouldn't be done they might already have. This has led, as we've all too often seen, to their exploitation by unscrupulous teachers. It would clearly be for the good of the world if the Buddha's protective teachings were dusted off and returned to their rightful, central place in every school of practice that claims to take inspiration from him. This might not prevent the exploitation of students in all cases. After all, there will always be people, both students and teachers, who see rules as an incitement to rebel. But, unlike the blanket teachings of ego destruction and the non-duality of right and wrong, the clear distinction between what should and shouldn't be done would provide no room at all for justifying such bewildered and unsafe behavior as compassionate or advanced.